Good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life. I'm your host, Jim Therian. From the first time I thought of having a show on public access television, I had envisioned an environmental program that was aimed at telling people what they could do in and around their home, yard, and neighborhood to help the local flora and fauna. The show would consist, at least to some degree, of a list of projects and activities that would make a small but significant difference. The goal, of course, is to have many people participating in these activities, so together we can make our world a little cleaner and greener. So I came up with a list of environmentally themed projects and activities that the average homeowner could do, and it turns out that the list is rather long. Then the question became, where do I even start? And I thought of all the things a homeowner could do to help their local environment, putting up a birdhouse would be an easy first step. To help us on this initial foray into the cleaner and greener by way of putting up a birdhouse or two, we have tonight's guest, Mr. Joe Attwater, a conservation biologist and education coordinator at the Tory Peterson chapter of the Connecticut Audubon Society in Old Lyme. Good evening, Mr. Attwater, and welcome to A Slice of Life.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Would you tell us a little bit about your functions at Audubon?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm at the Tory Peterson Estuary Center. We're one center of the Connecticut Audubon Society, which is a statewide organization. Mm-hmm. So for the Tory Peterson Estuary Center, we like to say RTPEC because it's a bit of a mouthful otherwise. Right. I do public walks, public programs, bird walks, do virtual courses, webinars, runs the gamut. Let's see, I have to think about it now too. I do habitat assessments for local landowners and Lyme and land trust properties. I do bird surveys for local land trusts and property owners as well. Really anything outdoors and bird related. And I also teach pre-K through 12 environmental education as well. So we're at the schools, going to the schools, teaching the kids environmental education.
Well, I got you here tonight to talk about building and putting up birdhouses, and I want to talk to you about getting an assessment of the need for putting up birdhouses.
Sure.
Let's start tonight with the Barred Owl House. It's a fairly big house. Let's see. What do barred owls eat? Let's say that.
Yeah. So, and you're right to say it's a large house. They're probably the second largest, most common owl in Connecticut, behind the great horned. And their primary diet is mostly mammals, small mammals like voles, squirrels, chipmunks. Occasionally birds. They can eat things as large as ruffed grouse, which is impressive. You know, they weigh a little over a pound, and a barred owl weighs about 1.5 pounds. So that's a big meal for a barred owl. Right. But they'll also fish. They can catch fish in the water. They'll swoop down and catch fish in the water, wade into water to catch fish and crayfish,
wow.
Which would be quite the sight to see too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But their main diet is mostly small mammals and small birds.
Now, would you say that in this area of southern Middlesex County or along the shoreline there is a housing shortage for the barred owl?
Absolutely. And I would say there's a housing shortage for all the birds we'll go over this evening. All the birds we're going over this evening are cavity nesters, and that's why they're nesting in these boxes. And cavities are a limited commodity. You know, they're kind of in short supply. Right. So especially for a barred owl, being such a large bird, they need a large cavity to nest in. So finding those large natural cavities is pretty difficult. Their main site that they would nest in are dead snags, dead trees, and we tend to remove those. Partially because they don't look great in our yards, right. But it may also, pose a threat to our buildings, our cars, our family.
Now, do they have a specific tree that they're looking for, or just anything with a hole?
Anything with a hole, yeah. Not a specific tree necessarily. And when you put up your owl box, it doesn't matter if it's a conifer tree or it's a deciduous tree, as long as it's between 12 and 15 feet high and there's no branches or leaves obscuring the entrance.
Now, in these plans that I got off the internet, it said that the minimum height was about 15 feet high, mm-hmm. and the maximum height was about 40 feet.
Yep.
Do you concur with that?
Yeah, they're kind of using whatever natural cavity they can find.
Okay.
The higher off the ground, the better chance they can or avoid predators like raccoons and other nest predators that might come in.
Right.
So if there's a cavity 15 feet off the ground, they'll use that. If there's a cavity 40 feet off the ground, they'll use that as well.
Well, that's I got to tell you, that's encouraging because so far I've put up 3 barred owl houses, and I'm not sure that any of them have residents yet.
I always tell people don't be discouraged if, especially if you put it up the first year and there's no owls nesting.
Right.
Part of that is it depends on the habitat you're in. Barred owls require large tracts of mature forest. So if you're in a suburban neighborhood, it may not be the best place for an owl box. If you abut a large land trust property or a large forest, that may be the perfect habitat for them.
Now, okay, so we did what do they eat? What's the biggest prey that they could eat?
Probably something as large as a large rabbit or a large bird like a game bird like a grouse or a
perhaps a domestic cat.
No, I don't think you have to worry too much about your cats, thankfully. Okay. That may be more of an issue with great horned owls. They're probably one of the most voracious predators we have in Connecticut.
I have heard that, yeah.
But a barred owl and even a great horned, a cat poses a big threat. They're going to fight back. They're a little larger. I wouldn't worry too much about your cats and barred owls. And I do recommend, regardless of if you're worried of your cat, bring your cat indoors at night especially. Cats are the #1 killer of songbirds. So bring your cats indoors, and it's better for the birds, better for the cats.
That's actually another show in the future, I bet.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Now in looking at the plans that I've found online, some of them have a roost, which is the one on the left. I put a roost up.
Right.
That's actually going in my buddy's yard in the next month or so. And then some have no roost. And I was just wondering, why is there such a difference, or is it just depends on who's making the plan?
Yeah, so I would recommend, the barred owl, it's probably fine for a roost. You can always place it near another branch, and that's going to be really key for the fledglings when they come out.
Yeah.
And barred owl fledglings will probably be coming out in the next month or two.
Oh, wow.
They come out usually in May and June. They're going to be coming out pretty early. What you don't want to do is put a bar out there for something smaller, which we'll get over, because that makes it easy access for a predator to come in. So for a barred owl, it's probably fine to have that branch out there to allow the fledglings to kind of pop out when they're ready at the end of the season.
Now, the other instructions in this plans, both plans actually, said there has to be about 4 inches of wood chips in the bottom.
Yep.
And as we'll talk about the other boxes, they indicate the boxes have to be cleaned out. Why is it that the barred owl house doesn't have to be cleaned out?
Great question. Barred owls and most owls don't bring their own nesting materials into the nest.
Okay.
So while we're used to nests being built by songbirds and other birds, they'll bring in their own material. Owls don't usually bring in their own material. They may add some moss and feathers, but those wood chips and that material in there is kind of getting it started for them.
Okay.
While other nests, and we'll go over this in a little more detail, you do want to clean out those older nests.
Now, is there any way, if I put up my barred owl house, and I have one in my backyard, it's at about, I think it's 18 feet from the perch to the ground. Is there any way to lure them in, or do they just have to kind of stumble onto it?
Yeah, I mean, being in the right habitat is a huge part of it. So just if you're in the right area and you can listen for them, they have a really fantastic who cooks for you, who cooks for you all call. So if you hear them in your neighborhood, you've got them in the area. If you leave part of your yard wild, so leave maybe the edges of your yard a little bit overgrown to allow for rodents and things to come through. Turn off your lights at night, especially if you have backyard lights, and remove things like soccer nets, basketball nets, because owls can fly into those at night. They're not paying attention and they can actually get tangled in those. So that's a good way to keep them safe too.
Right. Now, I got to tell you, letting a portion of your yard go wild to encourage rats would be a really hard sell.
I agree.
But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
It's all about balance and control. So if you've got enough predators and enough your environment is balanced, you may have some in there, and if you're keeping a part of your yard wild, they may go to that part anyway. If you keep brush piles, you're encouraging nature as it is, so that they have no need to go into your basement or your attic.
Now, occasionally, I'll go for, especially in the winter, I'll go for walks well before sunrise. And on several occasions, I have heard a great horned owl. And I was just wondering if there's a great horned owl in my neighborhood, is he going to be pushing the barred owl away So is it not likely that I'm going to have a barred owl in my backyard?
That's definitely a possibility, yeah.
Is it?
Great horned owls are the main predator of a barred owl.
Oh, wow.
They really don't have to worry about anything else except for us and a great horned owl. So there's a good chance if there's a great horned owl nesting, they may push out the barred owls. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to be in the same habitat. I lead owl prowls every winter where I take folks out, we listen and look for owls at various locations around southeastern Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
And I've seen barred owls in the same locations I've heard great horns. So it's not impossible.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah, but if there's a large predator, they're less likely to nest in those spaces. Yeah.
Let's move on to the Kestrel House. Actually, this is, according to the plan, it's for eastern screech owls and kestrels, a boreal owl, and a bufflehead.
Yep.
But due to space, I just put screech owl and American kestrel on there. Does this box have to be cleaned out?
This one I would probably clean out. It's the same idea, that, especially with the screech owls, they won't bring their own material in.
Right.
The kestrels may bring some material in on their own. You know, they are another bird of prey. But if you're trying to encourage screech owls, they also need a bit of wood chips in there to get the nest started.
Now, I have been what is now called birding for most of my life, long before it was considered fashionable or cool. And I have never seen a kestrel, an American kestrel. And from the pictures, it's a very pretty bird. I would ask you, is it common or is it uncommon? Is it habitat specific?
Yeah, they are fairly common. They're one of the more common falcon species. But a couple things. One, their numbers are declining. They are a species of concern here in Connecticut.
Okay.
And part of that is due to habitat need. They require open grasslands and agricultural fields.
Right.
And as we move away from those kind of the old farming days back in the 1800s and early 1900s, we lost a lot of those open fields and open grasslands. And so those habitats and they're also successional habitats. If we don't maintain them as a grassland, they turn back into a forest, and that's not where a kestrel can live. So that habitat reduction is one of their causes for the loss of numbers of kestrels. And they also compete with European starlings for nesting cavities.
Right.
But one of the other things I say is, they are one of the more common falcons. They're pretty small birds. They're maybe about the same size as a mourning dove, actually. So there's a good chance that you may have come across a kestrel without even realizing it. And there's many a time where a mourning dove has flown across and I thought it was a small falcon, and in fact it's a mourning dove. So habitat need and habitat requirements combined with them being slightly smaller, less obvious birds than say a red-tailed hawk or even a peregrine falcon might make it so that they're just going by unnoticed.
I kind of like that.
That plan. Exactly. So we got to get you to see a kestrel. That's
now,
what
does a kestrel eat primarily?
So they're eating small mammals as well, but they'll actually go after large insects. So dragonflies, butterflies. They eat a lot of large insects, katydids and things like that, flying insects. And they will occasionally go after small birds too, small songbirds. But they have a pretty varied diet as well.
Now, the screech owl has a very unique call.
Yes.
And when I was living in Newington, I had a job at UPS, and I would get up and on the road by 3 a.m. And on a number of occasions, I heard a screech owl calling. It was a very nice call. I liked it.
Yeah.
I would ask you what does the screech owl eat, and does he compete with the barred owl for whatever he's eating? Yeah,
so they're also eating small mammals as well, things like voles and moles, and small insects as well. There may be some competition as far as them and barred owls. Barred owls tend to eat slightly larger prey, and screech owls are strictly nocturnal. While barred owls will occasionally hunt during the day, even occasionally during the late evening and early morning. And there's a slightly different habitat need too. So screech owls prefer any wooded habitat. If you've got a large park in your city, suburban neighborhood, there's a good chance you've got a screech owl there.
Oh, wow.
Well, again, the barred owls require more mature forests. So the screech owl prefers a more open forest, while the barred owl is a more closed, mature forest. So those habitat differences also help reduce the competition among the species.
Now, is it the habitat differences, is that because their preferred preferred food item, or just because their wingspan is determined by where they can fly? Or
it's partially due to food, and partially also to reduce competition. Birds. If all the birds were in the same habitat, there'd be a lot of competition for the same food resources.
Right.
So I can't speak to the evolution of the screech owl and how it came to inhabit those certain habitats.
Right.
But it comes down to food resources, nesting needs, and things like that as well. There's a whole suite of different reasons why the screech owl is where it is versus the barred owl. That's a whole other series we'd have to do based on habitat needs.
Well, as I said in the intro, there's just a laundry list of things that we can talk about in trying to make your little corner of the world a little bit cleaner and greener. And hopefully I can, with your help, continue to cover these things. I would say the Kestrel House and the Screech Owl House should probably be cleaned out. How high up should we place that?
So for those boxes, anywhere from 10 to 30 feet is a good height for them.
All right.
So they can go a little bit higher than the barred owl boxes.
Oh, wow.
And they are a smaller bird, so that kind of makes sense. You want to increase put them a little higher so that predators don't come in. Screech owls will also be hunted by great horned owls as well. So when you're out looking for owls, and if you're trying to get callback for owls to see if they're in the area and breeding, you always go up in size. So if you play a great horned owl first, none of the smaller owls will come out because they know there's a major predator. So you start with screech, go to barred, then finally great horn, and then that way you kind of see what's
going on.
Exactly, yeah.
You get a better idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
All right.
And I did want to mention too. You mentioned bufflehead and and boreal.
Boreal.
Neither of those nest here in Connecticut, so that's why we wouldn't really. Boreals are far north, and buffleheads also nest a little bit farther north.
Oh.
So this box here in Connecticut would really be only for kestrels or screech owls, or unfortunately European starlings too, if they happen to get in there.
Oh, really?
They can't get into a hole smaller than an inch and a half, which is why things like bluebird boxes and wren boxes are made smaller.
Right.
But given that a kestrel and a screech owl are larger birds, they do need a larger opening. And in fact, kestrels are the second most competitive birds with European starlings behind northern flickers. So they have the most nest competition, or second most next to northern flickers for European starlings.
Oh, wow. Now, can a kestrel just kind of kill a starling if he's in his box and he wants it?
You'd think so, and they have the talons and the beak to match it. But if you look at the size, there's actually not a huge size difference between a starling and a kestrel.
Oh, wow.
The kestrel's a little bit heavier and a slightly larger wingspan, but there's actually not a huge size difference. And the starlings tend to be pretty aggressive too, which is part of the problem.
Yeah, they can be that.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time? Let's go to break. So we're going to take a few minutes out, and we're going to have some PSAs, and we'll be back in a little bit.
Hey Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
My kids put skis on as they were learning to walk. I want my kids to be able to have those moments with their kids. Being a scientist, I'm worried about climate change in so many different ways for my kids. From the second you have a child, you want to do everything to protect them. I think our action on climate change is no different. It's just an extension of being a mom.
Okay, welcome back. We're here with Joe Attwater. He's from the Connecticut Audubon, and we're talking about putting up birdhouses to, I guess, alleviate a housing shortage.
I like the way you put that. It's true, yeah.
And you know, the really nice thing about these projects, these birdhouses projects, is that they're not very complicated to make, and it would make a nice family project if you just printed off the plans and got the wood and put up a house. It's just that it's really It's a nice project for the family to do, something to think about. Now, the last birdhouse we're working on is the Bluebird House. I understand the Bluebird has made quite a recovery. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's in large part to those bluebird houses. So bluebirds also prefer more open habitat for breeding. That's why you find them. Bluebird houses usually on the edges of farm fields and large open areas. And same idea with the kestrels. Those open areas, those grasslands and agricultural fields in the the early 1900s turned into forest. And we tend to think that massive amounts of forest is the best kind of habitat.
Right.
And that's great for some species, but not so good for birds like eastern bluebirds.
Right.
So with the loss of their natural habitat, insecticides that killed off their prey, their insects in the early 30s, and then competition from invasive species, their numbers started to decline. And one of the reasons for their decline was also loss of dead trees and snags for their nesting holes.
Right.
And so I think it was around the 1960s that a couple of folks realized that if we start building nest boxes, that might start to bring some of those birds back. And sure enough, they started to build nest boxes. And in fact, there's a couple different bluebird associations and societies dedicated to these birds, and that really helped the population rebound.
I wonder if, since the Bluebird House program got started in the 60s, if perhaps Rachel Carson was an influence there with her book on the Silent Spring.
Absolutely, and Roger Tory Peterson too. He was huge friends with Rachel Carson.
Local boy just across the river.
Yeah, our namesake. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah.
So he was pivotal in that, in removing DDT from the area and from the United States, and that helped the bluebirds and the osprey and the eagles come back as well.
It was huge.
Yeah.
Now, one thing about this Bluebird House, and again, referencing the different plans that you see online, some plans have this little metal square thing with a hole in it.
Yep.
And some have another like block of wood on top of the hole with another hole in it. So like they have to go through a tiny tunnel.
Yeah.
Again, I'm wondering which if you're going to put up a Bluebird house, which style of house should you go with?
So that metal plate and the block are to reduce predators coming into the box. And a lot of it has to do with the predators in your area and your habitat. So it may be that, in some instances, in some locations, they need exclosures, actual cages to keep out predators.
Right.
And you'll see that occasionally. But, really that block or the metal piece there can help a lot of keep rodents out, especially. One of the best things you can do is put a baffle around the base of the pole, and that really helps keep a lot of snakes and rodents out as well. And that's
funny. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I put up a birdhouse that in my backyard that I made with my son when he was in Boy Scouts, and something came along and just chewed out the hole much bigger than it was.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything. I just naturally blamed the squirrel. But I'm not sure what made it, but it's definitely got gnawed on by something.
Yeah, it could have been a squirrel, a flying squirrel, or even a mouse or a rat or something too.
Wow. Now, the Bluebird house, they say you have to clean that out.
Yes. So that's another interesting one. I usually recommend cleaning your bird houses out, your bluebird houses out. And I actually just read a study recently. In Kentucky, they actually found that the nests were more successful when they didn't clean the nests out. But around here, you do want to remove nests. A couple reasons. One, it reduces parasites and mites and things that could live in there, as well as rodents that could move in there during the off season. But another one is they'll build nests on top of those old nests, and as they build up those nests, it brings the chicks closer and closer to the entrance of the hole of the cavity of the nest box, and that puts them closer to risk of predators. So
getting grabbed.
You want to keep them lower down in the nest box.
Okay, all right. And my next question is, and I guess it's about the clean out. If you find a natural hole, natural occurring cavity, that's not going to get cleaned out.
They occasionally the bluebirds will clean it out themselves as well. They'll do natural maintenance as well.
Right.
So those will get cleaned out by the bluebirds, especially if it becomes an issue. But they won't use a nest if it's too crowded. They may move on to a different cavity if it's just full of too much material, or it might get moved in by a mouse might move in or something.
Now, what do bluebirds typically eat?
During the breeding season, they're eating a lot of bugs. That's really important protein for the chicks.
Right.
In the off season, in the winter, they may switch to berries. But in the breeding season especially, lots and lots of bugs. If you want to attract bluebirds to your yard, and especially in the wintertime, put out mealworms. They love mealworms.
Well, yeah, they have that for bird feeders. So.
Yeah, that's a great way to attract bluebirds to your yard.
Okay. Now, how would you mount a bluebird house?
So most of the time you want to mount a bluebird about 4 to 6 feet off the ground on a metal pole.
Wow.
And the metal is important because if you put it on a wooden post, that's an easy way for a rodent or a predator to crawl up. They can latch onto that, and they can't do that with a metal pole.
Right.
You want to do it low enough that you can still access the birdhouse. You want to have a way to open it to clean it out, or to look for predators and look at nest success too. If you have an issue with predators, you can put up a little higher and use a ladder. But 4 to 6 feet is usually a good height on a pole. And again, make sure you've got that baffle underneath too.
Now, what about competition? I read once where house sparrows will aggressively move into a bluebird house.
Absolutely, yeah. They are probably one of the biggest competitors for them. And one of the things you can actually do is if you have issues with house sparrows, you can either put a dummy nest nearby, and so they'll go into that nest and leave the bluebird box alone.
Oh.
You can also drill a second hole next to the other hole, and that allows the bluebirds to better defend the nest from house sparrows. So if you have a lot of house sparrows in your area, you can drill that second hole, and that allows them they're not stuck in that one spot, and they can actually defend their nest better that way too.
Like a back door?
Actually, you can drill right next to the other hole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that they could get out and
Yeah, they could either
mount
get out
their defense.
or defend from inside. Yeah, so they're not stuck in there and stuck in there with the house sparrow.
Now, I'm wondering how. Now, I know the Bluebird program has been successful. A lot of places will have a Bluebird trail. I know in Newington, around the community garden, they had a Bluebird trail, and so I was too busy taking care of the kids and going to work and stuff, but I was aware of the Bluebird Trail. So Joe Attwater, a biologist for Connecticut Audubon, thank you for coming to our show. You've been very informative, and I'd like to have you back to talk on another subject.
I'd love to come back. Thanks, Jim.
All right, very good. So if you have some time, get a family project going and build yourself a birdhouse. Thank you, and have a good night.